Today, my guests are Jodi Nielsen and David Deshotels, and they are from Cost Segregation Services Incorporated. The company performs cost segregation studies for real estate investors. And in just a minute, we're going to speak with them about the ins and outs of cost segregation. But first, if you like the show, CREPN Radio, please let us know. You can like, you can share, you can subscribe, and always please leave a comment. We'd love to hear from our listeners. Also, if you want to see how attractive our guests are, be sure to check out our YouTube channel. That's Commercial Real Estate Pro Network. With that, I want to welcome my guests, Jodi and David. Welcome to CREPN Radio.
Darren, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you, Darren, for having us.
All right. Well, I'm looking forward to this, and we crossed the first hurdle for multiple people, as we're all connected here, so that's great. So before we get into the conversation about cost segregation studies, I'd like to get a little bit of background, find out your guys' background. So if you could share with the listeners just a little bit about yourselves and your background.
Jodi?
Go ahead, David. Start.
David Deshotels from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. So Executive Vice President here at Cost Segregation Services. So I got into this business because after Hurricane Katrina in Louisiana, I had one of the world's hardest public affairs jobs, representing the Corps of Engineers in New Orleans after Katrina, handling the national and international media. So I got to see how the government works, and now my mission is to rip back every federal tax dollar that I can and put it in the hands of responsible people that know how to spend it wisely. So it's a passion to be able to help people take full advantage of the tax code. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you. Jodi?
And I'm Jodi Nielsen. I am out of the Twin Cities area in Minnesota, and I have a little bit different background. I have a degree in nuclear medicine, and I got into helping people with a lot of variety of things, mostly savings, being a consultant on just different ways to help their business and cost effectiveness. And I'm a national senior account manager with Cost Segregation. I'm with them for many years and enjoy just helping people. As David said, what we do is just help people, if they don't like to pay taxes, we help them pay a lot less and make them very efficient with how they can use their money.
Well, you guys have some diverse backgrounds there. I'm sure this will be an interesting talk, and I'm guessing your backgrounds have helped you kind of cross some bridges that maybe others don't have the tools to do so. But before we jump all the way in here to cost segregation, or I guess might as well just jump in here. The topic of cost segregation is something I hear bantered about. You listen to people, especially syndicators, talk about how they can they'll do a cost segregation study and increase money back to their investors, and I know that the times that I've talked to people and learned more about it, I've learned that there are some there's definitely all the benefits, but there are some like qualifiers as far as who can take advantage of it when, kind of thing. And so I guess my first thing I'd like to ask is if you could define just what is a cost segregation study.
Well, basically, cost segregation, if you own a building and it's not your permanent residence and you file in the United States, you're definitely a candidate to be able to take advantage of it. Cost segregation is, the concept is, what we do is we accelerate to 40% of a building's depreciation by breaking down components and building systems and giving them a shorter life to be able to be accelerated. So by doing this, instead of having to wait 27 and a half years or 39 years, you're able to take a lot of your money right now, and basically it's about cash flow, to be able to make yourself more money and to use your money effectively, like I said. David, anything to add on that?
Yeah, and so there will be a wide, diverse audience here. So we'll try and keep it simple for you. So it's basically an interest-free loan from the government. Do you want your tax deductions up front in the first year that you build a building or purchase a building, or do you want to wait over the period of 27 and a half or 39 years to get those deductions? So cost segregation is the process of choosing to look at the building in its parts and pieces. And some of those parts and pieces are eligible to be fully depreciated in the first year. So you get your depreciation deductions in the first year with 100% bonus depreciation. So you can choose two methods: straight line depreciation, where you look at the building as a whole and take those deductions over a 27 and a half, 39-year life. Or you can look at the building in its parts and pieces, and some of those parts and pieces are eligible for accelerated depreciation. And so one's a little more complicated, but the results are immediate. So as my customers say, instant gratification never comes soon enough. And so the majority of people choose to get their deductions up front, if it's applicable and if they can utilize those.
Got it. So the basics are you assess the building, break it into its various parts, components, and each one of those categories has a different depreciation life expectancy. Is that right? I mean, instead of the full straight term, you break it into shorter terms.
Sure. So the IRS defines parts of the building. Some are personal property, and some are structural property. The structural property has to be depreciated over 39 years. The personal property is eligible for accelerated depreciation, usually 5-7 years. And there's land improvements that are at 15. So a cost segregation's specialist's job is to go in and to identify all the parts and pieces, to value all those parts and pieces, and put together a report for the client's tax professional to be able to justify and document all those deductions, and then help them with the filing of that. So that's our role. And with this new tax code, a lot of times 100% bonus depreciation is allowed. Most people will be, know that to go, oh, well, if I buy computers or equipment or whatever the case may be, I can go ahead and depreciate all those in the first year. What many people don't know is if you look at the parts and pieces of that building and break it out into personal property and structural property, the personal property is eligible for those same 100% bonus depreciation as your computers and equipment might be. So there's an opportunity to depreciate that in the first year.
So I think I just heard you say, so when you do a cost segregation study and you break the building's parts down and you have those that are now designated as personal property, they're eligible for the bonus depreciation, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
5, 7, and 15-year properties.
Wow. Well, and for anybody that, has April 15th circled on their calendar as that day, I'm assuming that can make a big difference in your what you owe or what you don't owe, based on just
Typically, yeah.
The depreciation is basically that gift to real estate investors that keeps giving. It makes it all work. So let's talk about the difference, and I want to make sure it's clear, because a lot of times I guess my anchor to depreciation was always when talking to my dad about buying a car. As soon as you drive it over the curb, it depreciates, and it lost value. In the real estate, though, what we're talking about is a tool to offset your income, kind of thing, and when you file your taxes. So my question is, can you describe it? Does it change whether I'm starting with a new building or if it's a building I purchase, an existing building?
Well, with the bonus depreciation, that was kind of a gift that was given from September of 2017. Prior to that, you had to have built something new. It had to be new, built new. Now, as long as it's new to you, so it could be a 100-year-old building, as long as it's new to you, you get to take the 100% bonus on the 5, 7, and 15-year property. And there's also what's called partial asset disposition, which we should touch on too, which is PAD, that you have to take advantage of the year that you do it, which is improvements that you're doing on your building, basically dollars in the dumpster, what you've taken out. The difference between cost segregation and PAD is cost segregation, to your question, you can basically do it anytime that you've owned a building. It's just it's more beneficial for you to take it as soon as you can, because we can't double dip on what you've already depreciated, straight line depreciation. So the sooner you can start taking accelerated depreciation, the better off for you. Partial asset disposition has to be done the year you do it. You can't go back and grab it. If you did something in 2017, you can't go back and grab that. So if people are doing improvements on their building, it's something they definitely want to look at cost segregation and taking advantage of the partial asset disposition as well.
Got it. And for the classification of the taxpayer, as far as whether they're a passive investor or a real estate professional, can you talk a little bit about how this affects them, the ability or when they can use the depreciation?
Sure, I'll
Go ahead, David.
It's cost segregation is going to create deductions. Now, is the client eligible to apply those deductions to his taxable income? So you mentioned that a passive real estate investor is limited to being able to take as many deductions as he has income. So he can, if he's being paid rent or lease on the building, he can wipe out all of that income with these deductions. So sometimes a passive investor is not able to take full advantage of all of the deductions that are available to them in the first year. So that's one of the limiting factors. You mentioned if you're a real estate, you have a real estate designation with the IRS, you don't have that limitation. So even though you have buildings and you're leasing those out, if you're listed as a real estate professional, you're eligible to take all of those deductions, create a loss, move around to other entities that you might have. So again, passive loss restrictions do apply, and sometimes they limit the amount that a new owner can take in the building.
Sure, and not to get too tax talk here, but deep on the account talk, but my understanding though is that even if you're a passive investor and you have this, though, it's not lost. It's just something that's carried forward, so that if when you sell the property, you've got, it's still there to use against your gain. Is that?
You're exactly right. So you can carry that forward as long as it takes to utilize those deductions. So as you said, it's not lost, but it's not instant gratification that comes with some owners of buildings.
Got it. So can we talk a little bit about more of kind of the disposition of, or what would you call it, the PAD, the partial disposition? Because I think this is one of the things that when I talk with investors, I think there's an understanding, but I don't know that all of their accountants are on board. I know the ones that I've talked with that are not so real estate oriented tend to lean towards just expense things as opposed to recapitalize. And can you speak a little bit to how the cost segregation study can either make that easier or help, or how it works? For instance, whether it be a roof or whatever that you're taking care of.
I'll take that, Darren. It's so you asked a little bit ago, how does this affect people that are buying a building and people that own buildings? So certainly cost segregation when you're first buying the building is optimal. You never, the best situation is never sending your excess tax dollars to the government in the first place. Do it when you buy the building, and therefore you're not having to go back and recapture that. If you've owned a building for a while, you can simply say, I want to change my accounting method from straight line depreciation to a cost segregation, and then cost segregation study identifies all the parts and pieces. And so you can go back and change that from the time that you started. So if you've owned a building for 5 years or so, that's probably optimum to go back and change your accounting method to do that. One of the other things for people that own commercial properties that are doing renovation or remodeling on the structure, the new regulations are very generous to them. So when you're remodeling, say you're moving out walls, you're changing plumbing, you're changing electrical, whatever that might be, all of those parts and pieces that you're taking out of the building, throwing away, putting into the dumpster, all of those parts and pieces have a value on the depreciation schedule. If you're removing those from the building, you need to remove those from the depreciation schedule, and that will give you a tax deduction, a tax write-off. So someone doing major renovations has the opportunity to value all the parts and pieces that are being thrown away. A lot of CPAs are not familiar with that or don't know how to determine, hey, what's that wall worth? Or we had to move the bathrooms. What was all that plumbing worth? They just don't know that. So that's where you need a cost segregation specialist, a valuation expert to come in and value all of those things that are being lost or abandoned in place or put in a dumpster, so we can write that off. There's a lot of tax advantages to what you're putting back in. So when you start replacing those with walls, plumbing, electrical, is it specialty electrical? Is it specialty lighting? Is it LED lighting? You know, all of those things has a value. We need to identify those that are personal property and have a 5-year depreciable life that are eligible for 100% bonus depreciation. So not only do you get the advantage of writing off what you're taking out, you also get to accelerate and use bonus depreciation on what you're putting in. So the tax laws are very, very favorable to those people that own a commercial building, but especially to those that are doing renovations on the building. The Congress is trying to stimulate the economy, trying to get you to spend money, and so therefore they're giving you your deductions up front versus waiting for those over some period of time.
Just want to add to that too, just for a second too. We should probably talk a little bit about some misconceptions about cost segregation that have been out there maybe for a little while that that have probably limited people that think that they can't do a cost segregation study because of, I'll call it the old rules that they understood. Like they think that if they own an old building that it has to be a new building. That's not true. It's just how long you've owned it yourself, Darren. And also they used to be that it has to be at least $1 million building or more. That's not true. We can go down as low as 150,000, but you can still have tax benefit as far as the study cost is versus each other. So there's just some misconceptions that kind of have been around that we hear once in a while. And this could be from CPAs too. It's not that they're not doing their job. They do a great job. It's just that they're not typically, I've never met one that has an engineering-based background. So they're not able, as David had mentioned, to be able to break everything down to be able to get the full tax advantage for their client. So we always mention that it's always good to have us look at it or somebody look at it to do like a free analysis to see if they're missing any tax dollars that they could take advantage of.
No, I hear you, because it's, you know, when you get into remodel and stuff, I guess one of the thoughts that that crosses my head is when you get into renovation, you got your contractor bid to basically to put in all the new stuff, right? When the stuff that they're taking out, does it start with on the cost segregation study? Does it have a brand new value based on the replacement cost or the value? I'm just trying to, so whether it be a roof or a toilet or whatever, if there's I know what the cost new is because the contractor's given me that price. Does that price reflect what your cost segregation study would essentially show for the value of that?
So Darren, the question that you're asking is, okay, how do you determine the value of what's going out? And so that's a function of how long have you owned the building? How long have you been depreciating these assets? What was the, can we use, a lot of people are doing an LED retrofit. Let's use that as,
Okay.
I want to come in, I want to change the light fixtures out, and I want new LED lighting. Okay, so what are the advantages for that person? Well, what's the value of the light fixture? How long has it been there? Have you owned the building for 5 years or 25 years? Well, that light fixture has a lot more depreciable value at 5 years than it does for 25 years. So that's the first thing that we do as cost segregation specialists is let's assign a value to that and determine, how much depreciation you've taken, what was the value when that was put in, and, what are we able to write off? What's the removal cost? What's the removal labor? You might want to ask your contractor to break that out. Give me a cost of ripping all this stuff out. Okay, now we're going to put that back in, and what's the value of that? And for lighting that's going back in, that's actually 39-year property. But hey, wait, under a different part of the tax code, section 179, qualified improvement property that's going in, you can write some of that off. So there's lots of parts and pieces that are lots of moving parts to the tax code. But for an LED retrofit, you're able to write off what you're taking out. You're probably eligible to write off what you're putting in if it's less than $2.5 million under section 179. And, if you start doing that, well, that's enough cash flow to pay for about half of the project typically. So there's a lot of advantages in the tax code, again, for those that are doing renovations, remodels, or just owning the building and going back and changing your tax method, or for those that are just buying a property. Does that help?
Yeah, no, and I think what I heard you say, and I just want to make sure that I'm clear on, because I'm not, most of the contractor bids that I'm familiar with, basically the line item, the new stuff, but it sounds like what you need to do is make certain you get a line item for the demo cost. Is that?
Yeah, tear out.
The tear out?
Yes.
And disposal.
So the bigger the project, the more sophisticated the remodel, the more likely you would want a segregation specialist in there keeping track of all this and doing the math for you. So if it's a small project, yes, you want to get as much information from the contractor as possible. They're not in the accounting business. They don't like to break everything down, and they don't like to tell you specifically what each part costs, because then you can figure out what kind of profit they've got. They're in the get your project done, here's your invoice, pay me business, and don't try and call them 4 months after the project and say, could you give me a little more breakdown of this? We see this all the time. So this is kind of the gap that a cost segregation specialist fills in that. You can't get that information from your contractor. Bubba just doesn't practice projects that way, nor share that information. So we come behind them to get that done typically.
Yeah, no, I think that's kind of the thing that I was picking up on, is that in order to make it easy and take full advantage of this, that a request up front of the contractor to give you some sort of a number for the demo would be useful. And then I'm curious, so if we have a cost segregation study done up front before the demo starts, and then we can identify what was ripped out, would we be able to go to the cost segregation study to determine the value of the materials that have been disposed of? So,
sure. In that process, it's for larger projects, it's best to have the cost segregation specialist come in, document the building, take lots of pictures of what's there. Therefore, we can evaluate what's coming out. If we have demolition plans, that's extremely helpful. Plans of the project after it's completed, that's very helpful. And then at the end of that project, we'll come back in, survey the property, take lots of pictures to digitally document that, and then we go to work and determine what was removed, what was the labor to remove that, what went in, and now what's eligible as 5 or 7 year property, and what might be eligible under qualified improvement property, where we can write off things that we typically wouldn't be able to write off, like walls and plumbing under Section 179. I know I'm throwing some tax jargon, but I want to tell you, there's a lot of advantages there for the real estate owner that were not there previously. And you need someone that's familiar with these new regulations, because your tax professional is not adept at capturing all of that information.
Got it. So you've mentioned having a cost segregation person on site, or come in and at least kind of document it for you. Is it normal, or are you guys in the habit of working with property owners and their project managers or architects or whatever to maybe guide or point out some places or opportunities to take advantage of this accelerated depreciation?
There can be opportunities where you're putting in movable walls, things that are not permanently affixed, interior windows, lots of glass, and so forth. Those are all things that are eligible for accelerated depreciation. A lot of people talk about it. I recommend people build what you're going to enjoy working and living in, and that's first consideration. Don't try and customize your look and feel of your office just to get a few tax dollars. But once you've built it, once you know what you like, then we'll come in and assess the situation and help out.
Got it.
Should add, it has to be in service too before they can take advantage of it. So the building itself needs to be in service.
Gotcha. So we've talked about all the good things for cost segregation study. Is there any reason why somebody would not do a cost segregation study?
They don't pay taxes. There's no reason to do it. I mean, if they're a nonprofit or government entity, and if they're not going to do anything with their money, if they're just going to put it in the desk drawer, then they shouldn't do a cost segregation. The whole purpose of it is to use your money to make more money, or to help your business, to grow your business. Like it's an interest-free loan to yourself, basically, as David said, not to the government. So why not take advantage of it? And and cash flow is king. People are paying more taxes, or they're making money. They don't want to pay taxes. And if they're not making money, cash flow is always king to keep yourself in business. And most people are in business to stay in business. So that's kind of where we come in. What can you do with your money?
Jodi, they're going to flip this building. What's your advice to people?
If someone's going to flip it?
Yes.
Probably it's not a good solution, just because most people want to flip within 4 to 6 months, and there's just not enough time. Our studies take 6 to 8 weeks. So by the time a flipper would meet me, we get things going, we're already into 3 to 4 months. There's just not enough time for them to take advantage of doing something with their money. But now if they're going to hold on to it for a year, they should probably look at it, because even if they're worried about recapture, a lot of times people say, I'm going to have to pay recapture anyway. I can use my, whatever, $60,000 or $600,000, whatever it is, and do something with it. But it's something that you probably want to look at with the CPA and get their advice. We can also actually lower recapture sometimes by what we're able to put into 5 and 7 year, typically 5-year property.
It's my advice to people is typically, if you're going to flip the building in a 3-year period, you may want to consider not doing cost segregation, because this is oftentimes it's a time value of money strategy. Again, we use the analogy an interest-free loan from the government. You're having to pay a specialist basically a closing cost to get you that loan. So the question is, what are you going to do with that money? What are you going to do with the additional deductions that we can get you? And hopefully that translates into cash flow. But what are you going to do with that? Do you have a great investment for it? Do you know you're going to double or triple your money? Okay, maybe that makes sense. But if you're just going to put it in the bank, you're paying a closing cost for that. And if you're going to flip the property within 3 years, have you recaptured your money? Has that money made money for you? So that's a personal. Every investor has a personal reason for doing that.
Strategy.
Reason for doing that. So you have to determine, what's appropriate. Sometimes people will say, well, the recapture rate is higher on personal property. So if I take this bonus depreciation and I sell my building at some period of time, I have to pay a higher recapture rate on that personal property. And that's absolutely true. It may be higher. It'll be at your personal income tax level. That's the recapture. If you're just doing straight line, the recapture rate is 25%. So, what's going to be your personal income tax level? It'll be recaptured at that rate. So even though the rate's a little bit higher, you're recapturing against the value of that personal property. So if you bought a building and you hold it and it's 10 years, what's the value of 10-year-old carpet? There's not much recapture value there. So depending on what you value that carpet at the time of sale, you may pay a little bit higher rate, but the recapture value is going to be significantly lower on some parts. So I tell people, with the proper exit strategy, that recapture rate is not so ominous, or the additional higher recapture rate is not so ominous. But there is recapture. We have to be honest with that. So this is, again, interest-free loan from the government. You're getting your deductions up front. When you dispose of the building, you have to pay that recapture, just as you would utilizing straight line depreciation. So what's the exit strategy? Do you utilize a 1031 exchange to be able to put the building in that and delay that recapture? That's a great strategy. A lot of people have used that. One of the changes in the tax code is the IRS lets you 1031 exchange structural property, permanent property, but no longer lets you exchange personal property. So you have to be careful that in doing a cost segregation study, you won't be there'll be recapture against that personal property. What's the scenario there? Well, in the 1031 exchange, property that you're acquiring, you will do a cost segregation study on that property. Now, in the next 3 years or so, you'll be able to take bonus depreciation in the first year. So that's going to offset whatever recapture you might have on the old property. It's offset by the new property if you buy a building that has as much or more personal property. So if you have a hotel that you're selling, but buying a warehouse that has very little personal property, you have to be careful there. You want to buy something of like kind that would have as much or more personal property offset that recapture.
Gotcha. I think I get that. It sounds like you do have to strategize your exit, just to make sure you don't create a problem. As far as where you guys can do this, is there a territory? Are you guys limited where you can offer your services?
As long as you file in the United States and it's not your permanent residence, that's basically the limitation. So we can go anywhere.
All right, great. Jodi and David, as we talked before we started the recording, I mentioned to you that by day I'm an insurance broker, and if we could, I'd like to shift gears here for a second. As an insurance broker, one of the things we do is we try and manage the risk, and we do risk management with our clients. And there's essentially there's three different strategies we look at on a regular basis. One is avoid the risk, two is minimize the risk, and then the third option is transfer the risk, which is what an insurance policy is. And as of late, I've been asking all my guests if they could identify what they consider the biggest risk. And just to be clear, I'm not looking for necessarily an insurance answer. If that is the case, great, but that's not the goal of the question per se. But I'd like to ask you, Jodi Nielsen and David, Deshotels. What do you see as the biggest risk?
I'll start and I'll let David finish if he wants to add. I'd say the biggest risk is you're sitting on, basically if you own a building, you definitely owe it to yourself to look at, because you're sitting on cash that you don't have to sell another widget, you don't have to make another widget, you don't have to sign another contract. It's your money that you're just basically sitting on by owning a building that you could use now. And so why not at least look at the numbers to see if it makes sense for you at this time, instead of letting more time go by just straight lining. And then also with the partial asset disposition, I would say it's very important to take advantage of it. That even if your business, let's say, is not even making money this year, but you're doing a bunch of renovations, if you don't take advantage of it this year, you're going to lose it. So you're not going to be able to take advantage of the opportunity of taking partial asset disposition. You will get the money and you won't lose it. So next year, if your business is making more money, or the year after, whatever, it's going to be sitting there waiting for you. So, time is always, time, value, money. That's kind of what we're about. And so the sooner you look at what makes sense for you as a business owner or building owner, probably the better off you are. David, anything to add?
Sure. It's one of the advantages of having a cost segregation study that we don't usually talk about, but since you're an insurance broker, Darren, is we've had plenty of companies that have called us back years after having done their study, and they suffered catastrophic loss, be it a tornado or a fire or whatever it is, and they will say, "Do you guys still have those 500 pictures of my building that you took when you did the study?" It's like, sure, we've got those. And so we have their building just completely documented from top to bottom, one end to the other. We'll come out and take hundreds and hundreds of pictures, depending on the size of the property, to completely document that. So if there is catastrophic loss, it's a documentation to say, hey, here's what the building was. Here's all the furniture, fixtures, and so forth. And it's been very helpful to people in times of crisis. If I can, Darren, if I can get off my soapbox or get on my soapbox again, it's been 14 years or so since Katrina, but I lived through the rebuilding of a major metropolitan area that was virtually wiped out because of climate, weather. And as our climate destabilizes, it somewhat destabilizes our economy. I was at a national conference, and there was a realtor that gave a presentation on Miami, the risk that Miami is facing being at virtually level and the rise of our seas. And he was saying, there's going to come a day or a time where as things get worse, as things get more progressive, and if we don't respond in a major engineering manner, there's going to be a time where the insurance companies or the banks finally say, Miami, we're no longer insuring your assets, we're no longer financing your assets, in those areas. And so I don't know when that would be. I certainly hope it doesn't come, but we're certainly headed in that direction. So from a macro 30,000 foot level, it's along the coastlines are going to be particularly challenged as climate change or global weirding affects those low-lying areas. So it'll be interesting to see how we respond.
No, I will tell you that the insurance companies believe in climate change. Their claims dollars that they pay certainly reflect that there's been an increase. And so you don't have to try and convince them. But no, it's interesting when you look at just the economic impact and, what the big picture is and for the people that choose to say that it's not real or whatever, there's plenty of others that would choose to argue otherwise. So appreciate your input on that. Before we wrap up here, what's the best way for the listeners to learn more or connect with you?
Well, I believe I'm going to be on your website as well with a downloadable page that they could scan or fax to me or whatever. My name again is Jodi, Jodi Nielsen, Nielsen. My phone number is 651-210-1921. Again, that's 651-210-1921. And my email is very long, but I'll say it slowly. It's Jodi, Jodi, Nielsen, Nielsen, at Cost Segregation Services.com. So it's Cost Segregation Services.com. And I'd be more than happy to help anybody. We do a no charge, no obligation analysis to look at your property to see what your tax saving benefit would be, and it'll show you what the cost of the study is. We're pretty accurate. We hit our numbers 98% of the time or above. We'd rather over deliver, so you know exactly what you're going to be getting. It's a pretty painless process for anyone. We do ask if you have appraisals or blueprints. We do a site survey, as David mentioned. We take pictures of the whole outside, inside of the building. And our studies take 6 to 8 weeks, and we will have a calculated, defendable study for you and your CPA to apply.
Great. David, is there any way for people to connect or follow with you? Or
Sure. It's again, my passion is to make sure that people are taking advantage of the new tax deductions that are in this new tax code that are brought to them through a cost segregation process. So if there's any questions whatsoever, buying a new building, doing a renovation, please send me an email at David@Cost Segregation Services, David@Cost Segregation Services. And either myself or staff here can help you through that process to make sure that that you get all the advantages that you are due. My thing is, friends don't let friends overpay their taxes. And so it'd be an honor to be able to help you think through those things and offer some advice on how to maximize those deductions.
all right. Well, Jodi and David, I can't say thanks enough. I've enjoyed talking and learned a lot, and hope we can do it again soon.
Yeah, thank you for having us, Darren. I really appreciate it.
All right. Well, and also, just to be clear, as Jodi mentioned, there will be a downloadable white paper that she's made available, and we'll have that in the show notes. So please click on that, check it out, and if you have any questions, reach out to Jodi on that. With that, I'd like to say for our listeners, if you like this episode, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Remember, the more you know, the more you grow. That's all we've got this week. Until next time, thanks for listening to Commercial Real Estate Pro Network's CREPN Radio.